everything will change. Everything must change. Nothing stays the same. No, no. Everyone must change. Nothing stays the same. The young become the old. Mysteries do unfold. 'Cause that's the way of time. Nothing and no one goes unchanged. There are not many things in life you can be sure of, except rain comes from the clouds and sun lights up the sky, and hummingbirds do fly. Winter turns to spring. A wounded heart will heal. Yes, it will. But never much too soon. Everything must change. The young become the old. Mysteries do unfold. 'Cause that's the way of time. Nothing and no one goes unchanged. And there are not many things in life you can be sure of, except rain falls from the clouds and sun lights up the sky, and hummingbirds do fly. rain comes from the clouds, and sun lights up the sky, and hummingbirds do fly.
That was dramatic. Oh, welcome everybody. First, I just want to thank you all for making time for us to come and share space with us, to honor my dad. It's super meaningful to our family, for sure. So thank you so much. I also know that we're streaming online, and so I know that there's some folks that have joined us online, so I just want to thank them for tuning in. That's wonderful. Now, as my dad would say, if he was greeting you on the phone, you sure are looking good. Really good. And it's nice to see many of you that I haven't seen for so many years. It's greatly appreciated. So I also want to thank you for all of the gratitude and support that you've provided to us, and specifically to my mom, since my dad passed away. all of the online sentiments that you've shared and the cards and the visits and the phone calls. It's just been overwhelming. And we're very grateful for that. Thank you so much. Your presence is definitely felt. Now, not everyone in the room may know me or recognize me, as I've certainly aged into what I think is a better version of myself, but I'm Jason, and I'm Brian's youngest son, and I'm his middle child. And I'm joined here by my mom, Donna, my wife, Leah, and our two kids, Joshua and Katie. And I'm sure many of you in the room probably haven't met Joshua and Katie, but you'll have that opportunity today, hopefully. Now, I know my dad would want to do this, and I want to pass along our sincere condolences to the Pat Gibbons family, to, the Neil Erlacher family, John McGarry family, Hank Brokaw family. It's been a lot of loss in this community in a very short time. And those, quite frankly, are only the people that I know. And I know that there's others. So condolences to everybody. Okay. This won't be a surprise. I really miss my dad. I really do. And as you can tell, it's an emotional day. It will be an emotional day for all of us here today. And if you're sitting there and you're thinking, that guy could really use a hug, come and hug me. Hugs are welcome. But fair game, I might come and hug you too if it looks like you need a hug. And I'm an equal opportunity hugger. So don't think just because you're a grown man that I won't hug you. Okay? All right, I want to give you a little bit of sense of what we're going to do today. This is really meant to be sort of a real and authentic celebration of my dad, and certainly of his life that we feel was exceptionally well-lived. We'll reflect a little bit on Dad's relationships. We'll talk about his passions. We'll share some things about him that you may not know. And we'll share some stories about the impact that he's had on other people. Now, there are some things that you would know about my dad just by looking at him. So maybe earlier in his life, if you looked at his forearms, you would know that he milked a lot of cows. And later in his life, when he smiled at you, you would know he was not on the same page with his dentist. Now, I'm not going to be the only one that speaks today. Other people have graciously agreed to share their time and share their thoughts with you as well. But I will say this is not necessarily formal, so if you find yourself, with a sentiment or a story that you'd like to share, feel free to come and ask me. Now, I'll put it out there. There's no expectation, but you are more than welcome to if you'd like. And folks that are online, you're more than welcome to text me. I do have my phone with me, and if there's sentiments you would like me to talk about, I'm more than happy to share them in the room. And I do want to mention that after we have this celebration of life, please join us for lunch, thanks to the Manitou Pioneer Museum. Now, if you knew my dad, he had a very dry wit, and he loved a good laugh. And so maybe as you've noticed throughout this, there might be a little bit of his humor. And I might, to the maybe chagrin of my kids, share some of Dad's best dad jokes along the way. For example, what do you call a cow with 2 legs? Lean beef. What do you call a cow with no legs? Ground beef. And that truly, I think, is representative of my dad's humor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my dad's passions. Beyond his immediate family, probably simply captured by understanding his passion for farming, for technology, and for sports, to be quite honest. And really, when you look at his life, these are reflected in his interest and pursuits and the things that he loved to talk about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the farming side of things to start with. Dad used to talk about farming as the best occupation because, quite frankly, in his mind, it was every occupation. He was entrepreneur, engineer, mechanic, salesman, veterinarian, child psychology worker, the list goes on and on. But every day for Dad was a new farming adventure. He loved it that much. And it was always about exploring new ways of doing things, or improving things, or eliminating things around the farm that were wasteful. And I can recall many conversations with my dad where he would pull out a piece of paper with another one of his crazy drawings on it. And it was some kind of system that he wanted to implement on the farm to really help him. And I grew to learn that these ideas were not just some crazy farmer thinking through, after a few beers in the field, but they became things like the building of the harvestor system that we had on the farm, or the organization of his grain drying operation, or the grain storage system that he had plans to build. And there was this crazy hedge trimmer that was like the most dangerous machine I'd ever seen in my life, where he took an old power lawnmower, built a bracket for it, put it on the end of the front end loader, and just tore up and down the Carolina hedges with it. I'm not sure that workplace safety and health would be all that impressed with those things, but they worked. And as the person who had to cut the Carolinas with the hand clippers, I was super grateful for those things. But it was almost a daily occurrence that local farmers would stop by to talk to my dad, whether it was at the farm or in the field. And whenever I asked my dad what those conversations were about, invariably it was about one of two things. Sometimes it was about, like farmers do, borrowing some equipment to help each other out. But more often than not, people were seeking my dad's counsel and his advice on things. And I grew to understand the respect others had for my dad's farming perspectives through those conversations that happened. And if you've driven by Sharon Farms, literally the home quarter, you would know how meticulously well kept it was. And Dad loved taking care of that farm, especially when it was the kids taking care of the farm, right? The days upon days of cutting grass, the months in the summer spent, or the weeks in the summer painting fences, or the painting of the house, or the trimming of those caragana bushes, or, the spraying of the weeds, the cultivating of the gardens. I grew up surrounded by these huge gardens that Mom and Dad would plant every year, and rows of corn and potatoes. And, how Dad kept his farm was a reflection of his love for farming and his respect for the farming occupation as well. And it was a little bit of insight into one of Dad's superpowers that I'll talk about later, which is his organizational skills. Dad was incredibly organized. Now, at its largest, Sharon Farms had more than about 2,700 cultivated acres and probably ran over 200 head of cattle through the operation. And I know my dad was particularly proud of that. Now, I will share with you, and we'll see if you get this, our farm had a really poor internet connection, so we had to move the modem out into the barn. Now we have stable Wi-Fi. Okay, so at this point, one of those individuals who so graciously offered their time to come and speak today, I'm going to call on Morris Freeston to come forward and share some thoughts with everyone. Thanks, Morris.
Good afternoon, everyone. When we first moved over to the Mars-Nilberg area, that was back in about 1960. McIntyres had been our farming neighbors, and even before, when my grandfather, that'd be Cliff Nickel, and Brian's dad, Archie, worked together. Back in those days, having a good neighbor was worth a lot. When it came to such things as helping out at busy times of the year, sharing equipment and supplies, and above all else, enjoying and visiting the many discussions about life in general. And as I grew up, these values of having a great neighbor with Brian and his brother Donald, besides the many visits back and forth, we worked together a lot when it came to farming. Didn't matter what time of the year it was. If you needed an extra hand, you knew you could count on the McIntyres. I was always so pleased to see the big red Massey combine pull into the field to help us finish harvest at the end of the year. After that, it was traditional. We'd go home to have a few drinks and a steak, and it didn't matter what time of the day it was. And one of the biggest tasks that we did working together was putting up silage. So anybody that put up silage in the past knows all the fun that comes with that. And we worked with Watsons and McIntyres and ourselves. We shared in that operation, and it was we helped each other with the trucking and the packing and the pit and all that kind of stuff. And later on, it was just Brian and Donald and us working together, and that really reduced the amount of time that we spent cursing at the silager wagon, or the silager itself. They were constantly breaking down, as anybody who's ever silaged realizes. On one such occasion, during a breakdown, I remember Brian was working on it was a clutch assembly, and those things are absolutely filthy. There's grease and oil and grime everywhere. It was up to his elbows in grease. And then you'd hear the wrenches clattering down through the chains, and they'd fall into the dirt. And you'd only hear a few little utterances of cursing, nothing really too serious, not like his brother anyway. He did, however, he got a real wicked gash on his hand. It was from a real sharp sprocket, I think. And it ripped open the back of his hand, and there was blood running everywhere down his hand. And he just kind of calmly looked up and said, "Gee, that's going to hurt for a while," he said. And I always enjoyed visiting with Brian and Donna. And I remember this one Friday night, I was planning to go to Marsden, just to, what you do on a Friday night, you go there and see what action there is. But before I left, I thought, I'm going to go visit them, because I haven't seen them for a while. So I went over, and Brian was pretty good at making drinks. And that night I found out what a Harvey Wallbanger was. 2, maybe 3, 4, I don't know. They just kept tasting better as they went on. So needless to say, I didn't make it to Marsden that night, but I had one heck of a good visit with Brian and Donna. It was fantastic. And then, of course, during those younger years, Halloween was always a good time of the year. That's when you go out and you play tricks on your neighbors, and it was all in fun, of course. And I remember one time, Sharon and Susan, they'd get on their horses and they'd go pillage and plunder the neighbors to the west. I think Rutherford's and Wells's were the brunt of some of their tricks, but I kind of stayed around home and thought, well, I'll just kind of terrorize the McIntyres. So anyway, this one Halloween I went over and I pulled the breaker right on the pole. I don't know if a lot of poles had the actual breaker where you turn the power off, everything went down, like in the whole entire farm, right? So I snuck over there, pulled the power, and then I just hightailed her out of there because I knew that somebody'd come running out. Anyway, it was all quiet. Nobody came out. And I thought, geez, I better go back and turn that back on again because maybe the ladies would start getting worried. So I went back, I turned the power on, and of course there's a mercury light right on the same pole. So I turned the power back on, and they're really dimly lit, when they first fire up. And I don't know if you ever get the feeling when somebody's watching you. Well, I turned around and I damn near peed my pants because there was Brian standing just kind of about 10 feet away, didn't say a thing. And as the power was getting on, I thought for sure he was just going to give me a real tongue lashing. But he just kind of stood there and he said, well, now, would you like to go back to the house for a drink? so, and you know, that's how Brian was. Rarely getting upset, always willing to lend a hand, and always seeing the good in people. And it didn't matter if it was a neighbor, a local club, or your community functions. If they needed assistance, Brian could always be counted on to help. He was passionate about farming, and as Jason said, he kept his yard immaculate, and the roadside ditches trimmed to a T. And that's something that was always hard to keep up with, right? Because, well, Brian's ditches are trimmed, I better do ours, right? And it was hard to keep up with them. But those are some of the things that I'm going to remember about Brian. And it's more than evident from the people that are here today that Brian has impacted us all in a good way. And I think we can take comfort in knowing that he was a great man with traditional values and a strong moral compass that guided by these principles, you know, they've been passed down from generations, right? And I think these guiding principles likely gave him the stability and making it easier for him to be dependable and consistent in his willingness to help others. And we will truly miss this great man, but we will never forget the positive influence he's had as a husband, father, grandfather, neighbor, friend, and community leader.
It feels, we should have clapped. I feel like we should have clapped. Oh, thank you, Morris. Yeah, that was incredible. My dad definitely had a fun side to him. There's no question about it. I'll talk about that maybe in a little bit. So I talked about farming as one of Dad's passions. Now I want to talk about sports. Yeah, Dad was, it's odd to talk about sports as someone's passion, but it truly was for him. I mean, he manifested this in a few ways. Like, he was definitely a great athlete when he was younger, played all kinds of sports, but most predominantly probably sticks out for playing baseball, maybe curling as he got a little bit older, but he also played football and he played hockey. He became an active coach and a manager. Some of you might remember he was very stylish as a manager. He had this 80s sheepskin thing that I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, there was probably, as Morris mentioned, it was pretty rare that you would see my dad upset. And in my recollection, there was probably really only 3 things that would upset my dad, really. One was usually banging his head on equipment when he was working on it. That was something that, you know, you would get a pretty good response out of him for. The other 2 would be the Edmonton Oilers and the Toronto Blue Jays. And so if you really wanted to see my dad frustrated, you would watch sports with him. And that's when it all came out. But I grew up loving sports through my dad, because of his involvement, but also my own interest in sports as well. And so I have all of these fantastic memories of sports with him. And, you know, I will share with you that the last time that I spent with my dad was actually helping him set up his laptop and his headphones so that he could watch the Blue Jays play while he was in the hospital. And it was just something that he loved. And you know what? When the kids came to his grandkids came to visit, they knew that Grandpa was going to have sports on. Probably Dad's most passionate team to follow, though, is Team Canada. The World Junior Hockey Tournament over the Christmas holidays had to be his favorite time of the year. And there was nothing that got between Dad and watching Team Canada play hockey at that time of the year, for sure. So what does a farmer talk about while milking cows? Utter nonsense. Okay, so I'm going to ask Rondina Milburn to come up and share a few thoughts on my dad as well. And I'll go get you some water and bring it up before you're done.
Okay, I have to show everybody this. I told Katie her dad would be all organized and have something fashionable. I have graph paper. I'm Rondina. I met Brian and Donna when I worked for them at the corner service for a couple of years, and we've stayed in touch ever since. They were very important and supportive of me at a very difficult time. And I always thought that laughter was the thing I would remember most about Brian, but it was also love. I knew times when I disappointed him. He didn't ever say it, but you could tell. But he never called me to account. He didn't ever chastise me, but it always made me want to do better. One word that I always think about when I think about Brian is brilliant, analytical. And I remember Garth Hollingshead saying to me that there wasn't anything Brian couldn't fix. Apparently it didn't go all that easily, according to Morris's stories. Brian had a quiet strength. And if you were ever in the corner service when Donna and I were working together, we loved each other, but there were times there could be some tension and some friction, maybe on occasion going into volatility. And when Brian was there, he always brought a calmness, steadied things out between us and with other people. My kids only came to see Brian and Donna once, but Brian made a big impression on my oldest boy because they're city kids. Ian would hate it that I said that, but it's just the truth. They're city kids. Dennis was about 12, I think. That's our oldest boy. And Brian took the guys out for a tour of the farm, and he let Dennis drive. Now, I initially wrote the Gator, and my husband told me that a Gator is only a John Deere, and that if that was probably not the right word to use, but that kind of vehicle, but not a John Deere. When they got back to the house, Dennis's grin was about this wide. He was just so proud that Brian let him do that. I don't know how much whiter Brian's hair was after that, though. As I said before, what I remember most about Brian was laughter. Now, unfortunately, these stories of laughter is usually Brian laughing at me, but I hope you find some joy in them. I hadn't been working at the corner service very long, and I started in the fall, so it was harvest time, and Brian wasn't around as much because he was busy on the farm. So he didn't know me very well, and he was working in the garage area and doing something, taking tires off of rims, and Garth was there watching and chatting. And I walked through to do something in the laundry or the car wash, and then on my way back, I stopped and I said, "That is so inappropriate." And I had looked at, there were two calendars on the wall. One was of a very scantily clad, beautiful woman, and the other was of machinery. And big machinery, like cats. And Brian and Garth just stopped. And I said, "I cannot believe he would put a picture of that machine on the wall." And I just kept walking. And Brian busted out laughing, and that pretty much cemented who Brian and I were to each other from there on in. They would come to Calgary to see Jason, and one day they picked me up after work at the Foothills, and we went to a mall. And we're walking down the mall, and Brian and I were chatting, and probably Donna was chatting too, and I was really not paying attention. And I walked smack into a sign in the middle of the mall. Brian and I were pretty much bent over, laughing our asses off. Sorry. And Donna, I think, chuckled a bit and rolled her eyes. And we could only see Jason's back as he was trying to put as much distance between Brian and I and him. But he brought so much laughter and so much goodness. I can't think of anything but goodness when I think of Brian. And there's a story that a friend shared with me after Dad died that gives me hope, and I hope gives Jason and Donna and Leah, Joshua and Katie, I hope it gives you guys some peace and hope as well. It's called Water Bugs and Dragonflies. Down below the surface of a quiet pond lived a little colony of water bugs. They were a happy colony, living far away from the sun. For many months, they were very busy scurrying over the soft mud on the bottom of the pond. They did notice that every once in a while, one of their colony seemed to lose interest in going about with its friends. Clinging to the stem of a lily pond, it gradually moved out of sight and was seen no more. "Look," said one of the water bugs to another, "one of our colony is climbing the lily stalk. Where do you suppose he is going?" Up, up, up it went, slowly. Even as they watched, the water bug disappeared from sight. Its friends watched and waited, but it didn't return. "That's funny," said one water bug to another. "Wasn't he happy here?" asked a second water bug. "Where do you suppose he went?" wondered a third. No one had an answer. They were greatly puzzled. Finally, one of the water bugs, a leader in the colony, gathered its friends together. "I have an idea. The next one of us who climbs up the lily stalk must promise to come back and tell us where he went and why." "We promise," they said solemnly. One spring day, not long after, the very water bug that had suggested the plan found itself climbing up the lily stalk. Up, up, up it went. Before it knew what was happening, it had broken through the surface of the water and fallen onto a broad green lily pad above. When it awoke, it looked about with surprise. It couldn't believe what it saw. A startling change had come to its old body. Its movement revealed 4 silver wings and a long tail. Even as it struggled, it felt an immense impulse to move its wings. The warmth of the sun soon dried the moisture over the new body. It moved its wings again and suddenly found itself up above the water. It had been a dragonfly. It had become a dragonfly. Swooping and dipping in great curves, it flew through the air. It felt exhilarated in the new atmosphere. By and by, the new dragonfly landed happily on a lily pad to rest. It was then that it chanced to look below to the bottom of the pond. Why, it was right above its old friends, the water bugs. There they were, scurrying about just as it had been doing just a short time before. Then the dragonfly remembered the promise. "The next one of us who climbs up the lily stalk will come back and tell where it went and why." Without thinking, the dragonfly darted down. Suddenly, it hit the surface of the water and bounced away. Now that it was a dragonfly, it could no longer go into the water. "I can't return," it said in dismay. "At least I tried, but I can't keep my promise. Even if I could go back, none of the water bugs would know me in my new body. I guess I'll just have to wait until they become dragonflies too. Then they will understand what happened to me and where I went." And the dragonfly winged off happily into its wonderful new world of sun and air. I remember once when I was back and visiting, and Brian was talking about watching the Bill Gaither Trio and enjoying the music so much. So I think this passage from the Bible would probably resonate with him too. It's probably something that he would honor. Philippians 3:20-21. "But our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who, by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control, will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body." And Brian's got good knees now. Brian doesn't have a broken heart, and Brian doesn't have a broken hip. He's whole, and we're going to miss him every last bit.
Thank you, Rondina. That was very touching. Whew, I need to gather myself. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little time talking about Dad's third passion, technology. I think upon reflection, it was probably always meant to be that I would work in the technology industry. Some of my earliest memories of Dad are sharing his love of technology, because there was no doubt that he was an early and frequent adopter of technology. One of my first memories was Dad bringing home this new wooden console TV. Some of you might remember them. They had really small screens and took up half your living room. Well, that TV was set up in the living room, and Dad, as he was apt to do, would say, hey, one of you go change the channel. And so my brother went running up to the TV, and just as he about to reach it, the channel changed. And my brother was like, what just happened? And then he reached to change the channel, and it changed again. And my dad was laughing, like literally falling out of his chair, laughing at us. I was too young to understand what was going on. I thought it was magic. I spent a lot of time thinking about and reflecting on Dad's love of technology. It was everywhere, literally everywhere. After he passed, Mom and I needed to keep busy, and so we decided that maybe it was time to clean up some of that technology. I took 5 truckloads of technology to Best Buy in Lloydminster, just to help them out, I suppose, in the recycling program. But I remember Dad was one of the first people to buy an Apple IIe computer, and he subscribed to CompuShare. And I remember him with all this glee taking me down into the basement. He says, you gotta watch this. And he did some things, and I heard lots of beeping and whizzing, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then pretty soon he clicked the button, and he's like, look, I can get the weather. I was like, oh, wonderful. But he was always researching these things. And it was I think Mom and I determined that he installed air conditioning at the house in 1986. And if you've ever gone to our house, it's freezing cold there all the time. But CB radios, I will forever have ingrained in my mind the call signs for our CB radios. Guess what our home call sign was? 99 base, because of his love for the Edmonton Oilers. Then I remember him showing me this brick bag thing that he said was a telephone. It was one of the first Motorola cell phones ever, but he had to have that in his tractor. And then he was buying Atari video game consoles for his kids, and then he was introducing me to Dungeons and Dragons and Bard's Tale, all these computer games. And he bet on Betamax. Bad one. Had to get a VHS, obviously. Then there was a satellite dish in our yard, and it was like, what? And if you know, once he replaced that with the next technology, he took that down and put it in the garden. He painted it yellow with a happy face on it and said, have a nice day. How thoughtful. He had GPS in his tractors before anybody had any idea what GPS was all about. Digital weather stations around the farm, and doorbell cameras, and Apple Watches and tablets. And then during COVID, the doorbell rings at our house, and it's a video conferencing unit that Dad had bought for us so that we can video conference with them, even though we couldn't come and see him. And I got to say, our kids love going to the farm because there's 2 TVs in the living room, and so you can watch whatever you want to watch. It's just great. And Joshua would say that he remembers, if Grandma wanted to watch her show, then Grandpa would put on his headphones so that he could watch his sports and not disturb anybody. Yes, technology was everywhere. So one day, Dad told me he had been named a director at Old MacDonald Farms. He said he had been named CIEIO. Okay, so now when I was growing up, he was certainly playful. And I still remember I made the joke about my dad's forearms and the milking of the cows, but if you ever saw my dad's forearms, you know that he was pretty serious. I remember my brother and I hanging off of those arms trying to beat him in arm wrestling competitions or racing against him on our front lawn to see who was faster. But it wasn't until I was in my teens, so I will say around the farm things were pretty serious, right? It was mentioned before, farms can be dangerous places, and my dad took things pretty serious. But it was in my teens when I started to hear the stories about my dad's fun-loving and mischievous past. Even the stories that Morris was telling, some of those I'm not familiar with. But, just to keep things brief and PG, in his university days, there were stories about greased pigs on the loose at the Agro's annual Egg Bag Drag function, and the all-night dance parties that used to happen, and those sorts of things. And then in his baseball days, it was like the post-game Labatt Brewery visits, which were seemingly legendary, but that group of ball players obviously had taken an oath not to share any of the details because I could never pry out exactly what was going on there. Related to that, Dad was very clear with his kids at a young age that he expected us to go to university. We could do whatever we wanted, never pressured us to to come back to the farm, but we had to graduate from university. And it was one thing that he was exceptionally proud of was his university background. So I tell you this because when I went to university, they're really good at icebreakers when you get into their classes because they want people to feel comfortable and get to know each other and contribute more in the class. Well, in one of the university classes, they asked us to name our favorite animal and why. And I heard lots of interesting parallels from other people like elephants and memory and cheetahs and how fast they were. And I stood up and I said, my dad. And you would understand if you heard his university and baseball year stories. That's the animal I want to be. But as Dad matured, so did his approach to having fun. In the days of the corner service with Mom, he used to love pranking people by setting the clocks ahead in the store just to cause mass confusion for people because they would sit down at Coffee Row for coffee and look at the clock and go, oh my goodness, I'm late. And Dad would just bust out laughing because, the joke was on everybody else. But I also remember Dad had this, what I would call a social case. It was a briefcase that held 2 bottles in it, and that's where his cheer and his mix would go. And around the holiday season, Dad would love to just drop in on local businesses and have some holiday cheer with them, which I think was wonderful. And if there's anyone in the room that attended my dad's 50th birthday party, you might have got a glimpse into my dad's fun-loving past because he sure had a good time that day. Now, it will forever haunt me that I was not present at that birthday party, but people took pictures. And I put them in the slideshow that was up earlier, but Mom made me take them out. As a farmer, Dad heard lots of jokes about sheep, and he'd tell the dog, but the dog had heard them all. All right, bear with me, because I have another story that I'm going to share from someone else in the room. So Janet is here somewhere. Where's Janet? Hi, Janet. So Janet Hollingshead Leslie, right? I got that right. So this is some memories that she has of my dad. So my memories of Brian. Brian washing the coffee pots at closing time at the corner service when Janet had her right hand in a cast. And it was a competition to see who was more awkward at washing them at the time. And Brian as the raffle peddler. And I think everybody knows this, like the recreation board Christmas tree, the Valentine hearts, the Easter bunnies. You always knew what he was up to when he brought his raffle boards to see you. And this one got me too. My dad's one finger typing, right? Like we teased him endlessly about this. Brian and Donna taught us all how to work hard, and there was a lot of us through the years. I don't really remember how I got the job at the corner service, but I kind of think that my dad just told me that I was starting on this day to walk over after school. And I was 14, and I was trying to figure out who I worked with during my time at the corner service, and it seemed like there was 4 different full-timers and 8 students that Janet could name. Brian was always the quiet guy at the meeting, but when he spoke, you should listen because he had something important to impart about the decision being made. For some reason, I thought that Brian was much younger than Dad. In actuality, there was only 2 years, and I don't know why I never put that together when we celebrated Brian's 50th birthday in Noni's garage. So Janet's favorite memory is the day of Rondina's going away party. And maybe Janet kept Rondina out all night. Maybe. And then Rondina was off to church in the morning, lunch with Don and Joyce Marshall, and then supper with Brian and Donna. And after supper, there was to be a gathering at the farm to send Rondina on her way properly. So Janet went to work. Brian and Donna went home as soon as there was two of us in the store. And after closing, Janet and Rondina joined the party at Brian and Donna's. And Brian commented to Janet at the time, "You must have gotten a good night's sleep because that's the best you've looked for a Sunday shift." And Janet laughed and said, "Brian, I haven't been to bed yet." And Rondina may have also called Janet a bad name because Janet knew about the going away party and it was a surprise to Rondina. Now, Brian always left the RM office by saying, "Work hard and be good," which is exactly my dad, right? All right, give me a moment here. I just got to get back to my spot. So I wanted to just take a few minutes and talk a little bit about who was my dad, right? So he was passionate about farming, sports, and technology, but really, I think many of you know him from his community involvement and community building, right? And his willingness to always help others and support the local community. And Dad's motivation for that was nothing more than his love for the community, and he really just wanted it to be the best that it could be for everyone. And I grew up to see Dad as private, yet present, quiet, yet commanding, and humorous, yet authentic. And when I asked others to describe Dad, and you've heard some of this from Morris and Rondina today, the words that came forward were conscientious, deliberate, patient, kind. And if Dad had 2 superpowers, people talked about them. One was his preparedness and organizational skills. Like, Dad would go to meetings, maybe never say a word, but when a question was asked that maybe no one knew the answer to, Dad would pull out his laptop or his paperwork and he would have the answers, right? And the second superpower was Dad's way of putting people at ease, people that he didn't know, right? He just had an empathy and an authenticity about him, and this ability to listen in a supportive way that created this sense of trust. Like, I can talk to this man, and I don't have to be concerned that he's going to share what I talk to him about. The one thing that has struck me in talking to many people over the last 2 months is how many people have said, Dad was simply one of the good ones, right? Now, what did Dad love? So beyond his passions. So Mom's cooking and baking, top of the list. Yorkshire puddings, cinnamon buns. But who in here has had my mom's cinnamon buns and does not love them? Like, really, they're like candy. Soft serve ice cream. He couldn't drive by a place that had soft serve ice cream without stopping. And when he was feeling fancy, he would get himself a peanut butter parfait. Chocolate cake. Now, this might be a surprise, but my dad loved dressing up. And if you watched any of the slideshow, you might have seen it, like the 3-piece suits and the ties and the sheepskin jacket. I don't know about that, but I wouldn't agree with all of his choices, but he really did truly love it. And music. My dad loved music. Now, it seems like there's a universal assumption outside of small towns that farmers love country music, but it couldn't have been farther from the truth for my dad. He loved disco and R&B and jazz. Those were his songs. My dad loved dancing. And I can remember Mom and Dad dancing at an Ackerman's local dine and dance event here. But I hear from Dad's friends that he tore up quite a rug when he was in university as well. I would have been curious to see what that looked like. My dad loved the Venice House in Lloydminster. Anyone in here remember the Venice House? He loved that place, mostly because he loved chatting with the owner and his family. And I ate more than my fair share of pepperoni pizza at that place. And if you ever have a craving for pizza from there, try Vern's Pizza, because they have pepperoni pizza like that. He loved Cliff Rose for clothes, right? Needed to get his clothes somewhere. But again, it was because he loved talking with the owner. And my dad loved learning. Like, he was researching and reading all the time. And I asked my dad what he was most proud of, and he shared these thoughts with me. So first, it was the life, love, and story that he had built with Mom. And second was fulfilling his dad's dream, Archie, for Sharon Farms. And third was helping others. And he talked a lot about West 40 rural development and how they never were able to talk about what they were doing, but how proud he was of the contributions he was making in the community. And he was very proud that all of his kids graduated from university, like he had told them they had to. His lifelong friendships. And he always talked about how he could go years without seeing his friends, but it was just like he'd seen them yesterday when they got together. And learning, quite frankly, like he just loved to learn. Now, one day I asked my dad what his angle was on agriculture, and he looked at me straight-faced and he said, "I'm pro-tractor." I mean, he had some good ones, right? Or did you hear about the award that my dad won? He was recognized as outstanding in his field. Now, I learned a lot of life lessons from my dad, a lot. Humility, probably the biggest one. And one story sticks out in my mind, and that was, I come home from school, he was in the field, and he needed to be moved. And he called, and he's like, "You gotta come and get me and move me to another field." So I was like, all right. I was a teenager at the time, may or may not have had my driver's license, but let's assume I did. And so I threw my hat, jumped in the truck, rolled the windows down, had the music blaring, drove out to the field, picked him up. We're driving to the next field. The sun's, in my eyes because we're heading west, and I'm like this. And out of the corner of my eye, I see my dad's arm reach over, pick up my hat, turn it around forward, and he says, "Even the coolest people do stupid things." And then he said, "Dumbass," which is probably the only time I heard, but anyway, it was good. The second life lesson was the energy you give is the energy you get. And this was really about, everybody's going to have a bad day. And you can choose how you show up for those people. And if you give positive energy, you're going to get it from them. And it costs nothing to brighten a person's day. And even in the hospital, he said, a little kindness and humor will get you everywhere, right? And it's so true. And it's ingrained in me, and unfortunately my kids, that anything worth doing is worth doing well. Okay, I'm almost done. Thank you for bearing with me. So, Dad was, without question, my hero. And when I was a little boy, he was larger than life for me, for sure. And I was his shadow. And I didn't know any better, but I witnessed him doing these incredible things all the time. And I just wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to do those things. And he climbed tall buildings. He drove big machines. He went to cool places. He talked to all these people. He wore these fascinating masks, like when he was welding or spraying or whatever else. And he built stuff, and he nurtured stuff. And there's a picture of the building of this hall, and I remember being on the roof of this building with my dad, helping to finish it, because he just did these cool things. But he also gave me cookies when I went with him, and that was a big part of it, I think. But I love being around my dad so much. I would go ride in the tractor with him for hours. Mom could attest to this. And I would sleep in the tractor with Dad. He had, the patience of a saint, I must say. So final thoughts. The initial shock and the overwhelming sadness I felt, and the emptiness, really, when we found out that he had died, that was hard. But it's been refilling, just with an immense amount of love and gratitude. Because Dad he was great. He was a wonderful man. It's all my memories of him are just so good. Now, he's no longer physically with us, and that's hard, but everything that we love about him lives on through all of us, and not just in our memories, but certainly in how I carry myself. It's something that I learned when I was in university is we're forever changed by the moments that we have. And it's inevitable, and you can't avoid it. And it's great to know that I'm forever changed. So yes, my heart is just full of gratitude for him. And it's so hard. I feel so fortunate to have been able to be his son. Okay, so thank you. I know this has been hard, probably to listen to me be emotional about this, but it's okay. So I want to thank everybody here, and I want to thank everybody online.
I'm gonna hold you in my arms tonight. I'm gonna squeeze you, baby, 'cause you know I got the right. And I'm gonna be your lover, man. Gonna love you right, 'cause I know I can. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Dun-dun-dun-dun. I'm gonna love you, baby. Gonna make you know that I'm your man. Riding along in my automobile, my baby beside me at the wheel. I stole a kiss at the turn of a mile, my curiosity running wild, cruising and playing the radio, with no particular place to go. Riding along in my automobile, I was anxious to tell her the way I feel. So I told her softly and sincere, and she leaned and whispered in my ear, cuddling more and driving slow, with no particular place to go. No particular place to go. So we parked way out on the Kokomo. The night was young and the moon was gold, so we both decided to take a stroll. Can you imagine the way I felt? I couldn't unfasten a safety belt, riding along in my calaboose, still trying to get her belt to loose. All the way home I held a grudge for the safety belt that wouldn't budge, cruising and playing the radio, with no particular place to go. When I wake up in the morning, love, and the sunlight hurts my eyes,
something without wanting love bears heavy on my mind. Then I look at you, and the world's alright with me. Just one look at you, and I know it's gonna be a lovely day. When the day that lies ahead of me seems impossible to face, when someone else instead of me always seems to know the way, then I look at you, and the world's alright with me. Just one look at you, and I know it's gonna be a lovely day. When the day that lies ahead of me seemed impossible to face, and when someone else instead of me always seems to know the way, then I look at you, and the world's alright with me. I just one look at you, and I know it's gonna